Hello everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com with a video on teaching you how to code in the programming language Elixir. Now Elixir is a functional programming language based on the programming language Erlang with a focus on being able to use it for web development. So I'm not going to kind of get into the website of things, I'm just going to get into the basic syntax as I've been doing with many different languages. Ideas is to give you the foundational pieces and understanding of how it's written so that way you can go teach yourself more. Okay, so this being a functional language, kind of like when I did the series on Clojure, it is quite different in its syntax and will take some getting used to. Okay, but basically, like most languages, you have variables that you can store data in. So for example, and here you just name your variable. So I'm naming my variable my string, and I'm just saying that it equals hello world. So that means when I decide I want to print it to the screen by using the IO function, so io.puts will put something on the screen. It's kind of similar to Ruby in that regard. There are some similarities to Ruby, but with the functional flair of Erlang and Lisp. IO puts my string. So then when I run that, missing terminator. Actually, here, let me comment this out. You can always comment stuff out by hitting Control \, except in this case. So I guess there must not be a commenting thing in Elixir. What I'm using is REPL it. Now again, REPL generally refers to, is what people generally refer to the runtime, the command line runtime of any particular programming language. What's a command line runtime? It's this thing where I can put in commands and get a response. Cool. Now I think if you're using the native Elixir runtime, you don't have to do things like IO puts. It'll just output your return based on what you put on that line. So you could literally just put hello world and it'll run. But if you're practicing on REPL it, you do need to use the IO puts to put something out. So let's see, that should work now. There you go. Hello world. Okay, so basically IO puts put stuff out on hello world. And you can put anything. So you just go over here, IO puts, and play around with the kind of variables. So you have string variables, as you saw, but you don't have to put it in a variable and then print it. You could just print the actual value right away. So string. There are doubles, which means, well, first integers. Integers would just be a whole number. Floats or doubles would just be a decimal number. Okay, the extent to which a language distinguishes between floats and doubles varies, but point is, if it's a number with a decimal, it's going to be one or the other. Okay, cool. io.puts. Let's test the Boolean. Usually there's a Boolean class, which means true is a value, true and false is a value, so notice I don't have to put it in quotation marks. But I haven't tested it out in Elixir yet, so we'll test it out. And those are sort of the main types of values that you can have in most programming languages. So let's run that. Yep, and that works. Okay, so then it prints out my values. So again, string 55, 55.5, and then again, any of those values I can then store in a variable by just naming my variable and then using the assignment operator equals in hello world. Although since this is a functional language, kind of like in Clojure, that equal sign might take on multiple meanings. Okay, so this is, one of the many ways where it gets a little weird. Cool. Now I can also store my variables in collections, which means being able to put more than one variable in a thing. So instead of arrays, they have what's called a list. Kind of like in Python, arrays are called lists as well. You never find two languages that are exactly the same, but you find a lot of cross-pollination of terms and ideas. So my list equals, and it should be square brackets, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I have 3 sets of data in there, and then let's put out my string and see my list and see what happens. Okay, didn't print out the list, but let's try printing out one item from the list. Now, usually when you're dealing with a list or array, the items are indexed. So there, how do I know where item number one is? I have to put it. It's in the first spot, and the first spot's always 0. So let's try that out. Doop doop doot. I did not like that, so let's do a quick check. Okay, so the IO function doesn't seem to want to print out a list. Now, if you were using the normal Elixir runtime, you just put the name of the list and it would just print out. But that is certainly the way you create a list. You just say, hey, my list equals, and then you can just put your list. And again, that's going to be in square brackets. It can have any kind of information in it. Now, the other type of information you can have, put into one big sort of bundle is a map. Okay, and generally that's every programming language. You have your array where you can put data in a sequence, and then you have maps where you can put key and data pairs. They're not always called maps. They're not always called arrays. Arrays can be lists. Arrays can be other names. Maps can be called dictionaries, objects, depending what language you're in. But the idea is, if I were to sit there and create a variable called my map, it would be my map equals percentage sign, curly brackets. Okay, that's the main syntax. That means it's a map in Elixir. Then what I would do is I would put the name of the variable. So we'll say name, and then I would put a colon. Okay, you don't have to do it that way. There's another syntax that requires everything to be a string, all the keys to be a string, and doing arrows. But this is the easier way of doing it. Basically, what you're doing here is you're taking advantage of something called an atom. An atom is just basically a way to create sort of a much easier to write variable name, to keep it simple. It's very similar to symbols in the language of Ruby. So basically all I'm saying is that name is going to equal whatever's after it. So I can be like name equals 5. Age equals 34, although my name should not equal 5. My name would equal Alex Merced, age 34, and then there's my map. Okay, now if I wanted to do it in the other type of syntax, the more longhand syntax, it would be more like this. Alex Merced, name, it would be like that. And then I have to take out this quotation. And then I would put another quotation mark here, and it would be like that. So name Alex Merced. So then I'd be able to actually call the value of name and call the value of age as a separate variable as part of my map. So that is what maps do. So they're just good ways to store lots of information. So lists and maps, what you do is you store information in a way that best suits you, whether they're labeled by a string of some sort or you just want them in a sequential order. Allows you to organize data for you to do all sorts of different processes with. Now, Elixir is a functional programming language, which means there are no classes. Okay, so object-oriented programming, not a thing here. Everything is done through functions. And generally, conceptually, what functional programming is the idea that everything is done through functions, and every function is pure, which means data never gets manipulated by a function. So if I create this list, that list will always be a list of 1, 2, 3. But I can then take that list, put it through a function, and create a new list without changing the original list. So data is immutable. So I start with my initial data sets, and then I'll run functions that'll edit them, but they won't change the original list, but create a new list with the result of what the function does. So if I created a function that adds 2 to each number, the original list, my list, would still be 1, 2, 3, but then after the running the function, there'd be a new list that's 3, 5. 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's the concept of functional programming. And the benefit of that is, since you're not manipulating data, it's kind of easier to tell when you have bugs, because if data doesn't turn out the result you think it did, then the particular function that just ran is the problem, because you can see what the data looks like after each function call. So you can see, did this look like I expected it to be? This looked like I expected it to be? It prevents there to be as much things sort of interacting in a complicated way that hopefully makes it easier to debug. I mean, always the catch-22 is that it's a very different way about thinking, and the syntax is often very different in purely functional programming languages. That it's much more of a leap to learn if you're used to object-oriented programming languages like I am. Cool. In that case, point is, functions are first-class citizens in a functional programming language. So that means everything is done by defining functions. And again, functions are just basically a routine. Think of it as a routine that you want to say, hey, you know what? Every once in a while, I want to do this routine. So it'd be nice if I have like a keyword that just kind of summarizes it. So that way I can just do it whenever I want. And the way you would define a function is you would name your function. So this is my function. And then I would say equals. And then you would put in this. So fn means function. The parentheses represents a parameter list. The arrow always represents that this is going to be the contents. So basically the function here will be the thing. So we'll just say it's 5 plus 5 is the function. And then you put the keyword end. And then there's my function. Okay, so now whenever I call my function, it should just print out the results of 5 plus 5. Let's test it out. Therefore, and that's always one of the things you want to get used to when it comes to programming is one, practicing. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But two, also trying to figure out why something doesn't work. So when I read this error code, I'm seeing that it says, you know what, there's a syntax error before the R. So you always want to refer to the documentation for the programming language. So let's take a look at functions. So I'll put a link to this website in the video description. So there's a lot to learn about the programming language. The idea is you learn the basics and then you can kind of go from there. But it's always about learning the basic syntax of how to make things work. Okay, so let's see our functions, load. Cool, 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 cool. Here we go. So function x, so that looks pretty much like the way I did it. So function, oh, you don't need to put parentheses around the, that's where we did it. So I didn't need the parentheses. Basically, I would put any parameters I need there, but I don't need any parameters. So let's see if that works. There before. Okay. Let's see if it works. Let's put a parameter. Parameter is just like a variable in the function. So if I say x, okay, and then say this function is going to equal x plus 5, that's what it is. So then if I say function 5, my function 5, what it should do is take that 5 as x and then add 5 to it. Okay, syntax error before. Let's take a look. Let's examine. Let's see here. What is this doing that I'm not doing? So there's the name of the function. It has an equal sign. Could it be the capitals? That might be the capitals. Let's try that. Nope, that's not it. A lot of this is trial and error when it comes to like nailing down an error in programming, but it's a good skill to have. Honestly, it's probably the most important skill to have. So let's see here. So then it runs fun. Function, x is the parameter, arrow, x, end. Function. Let's see here. Functions, functions, functions. Here we go, modules and functions. See how they describe it. Named functions. So let's do this. Let's practice this. This is basically a named function. And the difference is like what I was trying to do was what's called an anonymous function. So technically what you're doing is that this is really the function at the end of the day, and it has no name, but you can assign it to a variable. But it wasn't having it. Oh, that could also be it. I named the function twice. Oh, there we go. That should have been what it says my function equals fn, and then the x would have been here. So we'll put the x there. Okay. So let's put that in there. So basically the way this reads is you're defining a module, which means you're defining a function. It's called math. And whenever math is run, you're going to do the following. Okay? And then actually here, you're taking it a step further, because when they say define module, you're not defining a function, you're defining a bunch of functions. So basically here, this math module could have several functions, one of the functions being sum. So def by itself is a function, module, not quite a class. Okay, this is different than a class. This kind of behavior you usually expect in classes in most programming languages, but you're really just creating sort of a keyword which you can associate a bunch of different functions with. So def module math, def sum takes parameters a and b. So whenever sum is run, do the following, a plus b. So this end ends this def, this end ends this def module. So now IO puts should put math.sum. Okay, and that's probably also part of the problem. I didn't have to put a parentheses when I run the function after IO puts. Okay, now let's run that, make sure that works. Should work, it's right from the website, there we go. So that's what that does, is it adds 1 and 2 together. So this is sort of the longhand way of defining a function, which we might as well use. But again, sort of just to run through the syntax, def module defines the module. So if I were to change this, so we call this, we call the module Alex. Okay, we call the function add 5. Let's say we just take a parameter of a. Okie dokie, a plus 5. And notice I don't have to specify I'm returning a value. It's just kind of assumed in the functional programming language that every function returns a value, because that's the only reason you really use functions. It crunches an expression and it returns that value. So now I'm going to define 2 functions. So we can see that I can just define as many functions as I want in the module. In this case, this will do a minus 5. Okay, so let's do this twice. IO puts, so the module is Alex, and the function is add 5. And then let's change this because this doesn't exist anymore. Alex dot minus 5. And again, that's got to be exactly the same name, minus 5. So then we'll give both of them the parameter of 10. It looks like a function call, but there's a variable named a. A plus 5 looks like a function call. That's not a function call, so let's just do it that way. There we go. Okay, so in the first one, it took the 10 and subtracted. So 10 was passed as my parameter to minus 5. So this becomes that minus 5's a. And what it did, it subtracted 5 from a. Here, it took the 10 as a and then added 5 to it and came up with 15. So that's how functions work. And you can literally do anything with functions. So This gives you a little bit of a primer on the syntax of Elixir. Again, uh, Elixir is a very different programming language than many others because it's a functional programming language. So it's more in the same family as like a Clojure, Elixir, Elm, F Sharp. These are all functional programming languages, which are derived from languages like Erlang, Haskell, um, Lisp. And yeah, it does take a while to get used to. There are, but now that you kind of get an idea of how to play with it after watching me play with it, what I recommend is going to one of these websites. I'll put them in the description. Okay, and then just kind of running through these exercises and playing with the syntax. Okay, but you can use it, Elixir and Clojure, and any of these languages to do any kind of work that you want, whether it's doing applications, doing web applications. They have libraries to do all these things. It's just a very different paradigm to be working in than the languages you may be familiar with. So give it a shot. A lot of good stuff. I'll see you guys in the next video.